Last Sunday was our grandson, Ahon, who lives in Maplewood, New Jersey, was his 6th birthday. And he had a party on Sunday, and we didn't get to go to the party. But in talking with him on the phone Sunday afternoon, we reminded him that we had given him a helmet for his riding his scooter. And Grandma said to him, "Why don't you get a picture of this and send it to us?" And he said, "Oh, that would be so adorable." It's hard to be humble when you're 6 years old with a cool scooter helmet, isn't it? With that image in mind, and in the middle of this week, after reading and rereading the text from Matthew 23 from various translations, I settled on the text from the translation by Eugene Peterson that we call The Message. As a result, I changed my sermon title, which had originally been "It's Hard to Be Humble," but I will get to that in a minute, to "Humbled by Our Gifts." All this has to do with the gist of what Jesus says in Matthew verses 11 through 12. Listen to what he says. Do you want to stand out? Then step down. Be a servant. If you puff yourself up, you'll get the wind knocked out of you. But if you are content to simply be yourself, your life will count for plenty. So in this case, I guess Ahon was just being his adorable self. He is sometimes, but sometimes he's 6 years old. Do I need to say any more? In the context of our remembering the saints of our lives today, this statement by Jesus is very likely true for those we celebrate today. On the flip side of this idea is the song by Max Davis, an American country music singer, songwriter, an actor who died just in September of 2020. And I love his song, "It's Hard to Be Humble." The refrain goes like this: "Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way. I can't wait to look in the mirror because I'm looking better every day. You know me is to love me. I must be a hell of a man. Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble, but I'm doing the best I can." Jesus is not talking about this kind of person. I love what Jesus says to us today, especially from the Message. The text is packed full of theological issues, intriguing ideas about how Jesus goes about teaching the disciples and how he goes about teaching us about how to live meaningful lives filled with gratitude and humility. There are also useful parallels from Jesus' day to our days and lives, where Jesus speaks about the all-too-human phenomenon that we call hypocrisy. Dare I say it, that universal human tendency to profess one thing and do another. I think that's the reason a lot of people have trouble with people they think are hypocrites, because they put out this bold statement, professing who they love and how important Jesus might be to them, or how important patriotism is to them, and then they do something entirely different. There's some great research that's been done by on the church in the last 10 years about why young people, at least in many churches, have left the church because what they see people doing doesn't jive with what they see them saying and hear them saying. You see, the gap between our struggles with our challenges and our fears and anxiety can get kind of wide sometimes. Even in these times of COVID-19 and higher prices, another anxiety-ridden presidential election before us, wars so horrific we don't even know how to have a civil and helpful conversation about them at the moment, the Scripture raises a truly important question, and that is, what do we do with our gratitude? I must confess that during parts of this week I have to say, Pastor Gerry, get real. What gratitude? That is to say, it's hard to be grateful when there is so much unrest and turmoil. But this is not the first time I've raised this question for our consideration. It is not the first time I've preached about gratitude and what do we do with it, and it won't be the last, I promise you. Not the first time I've preached on a topic with which I struggle. Truthfully, right now I am really struggling with feeling grateful. I am grateful for living in what seems like one of the safest places in the world, away from the wars, away from the turmoil that's around us. But we never know, do we? Not these days. But there are those who will stand up and stand out and live out their creed. There are at least 30,000 people gathered on the streets of Washington, D.C. this weekend. Some of them representing one side of the Israeli-Hamas war, and some on the other side, trying to figure out how to coexist together. Not very grateful, maybe, for what's happened to their lives. What do we do with our gratitude? How do our gifts and talents impact our lives? Do they make us more humble and yet available in a hurting and struggling world? Do they make us grateful for those who've gone before us? Today we give thanks to all the saints of our lives, all those who have shaped and molded us in our faith. We don't need much imagination to see that the Pharisees had much for which to be grateful. They were religious leaders. They were of the privileged. They had power and prestige and positions of influence. Much more of all of those things than the ordinary citizen of the times. But as Jesus tells us so clearly, the Pharisees had this sort of ostentatious piety, this overrated sense of entitlement that must have served to cover up something else in their lives that they did not want ordinary folks to know about. Let's face it, my friends. It would be a rare thing indeed for any one of us here today to actually practice 100% of all we say we believe. Thank you, Trish, for that children's message about practicing what you preach. When I became ordained in 1989 and was called to my first church, I was also married to my wife, Pat, in 1989. After a couple, I should say, failed attempts at that enterprise. And I swore to myself I would never preach a sermon about marriage because I wasn't sure I could live up to what I might say in the pulpit with what I did and lived at home. Pat finally convinced me that it was okay. There was enough there. So practicing what we preach is really important. Other people notice. I have a friend I haven't seen for a number of years who is a Lutheran pastor in Arizona. And he was the senior pastor of a very large Lutheran church that had all kinds of fantastic programs, especially for young people. And he was leaving, he tells this story, he was leaving for a vacation and kind of in a hurry. He wanted to get his car washed. So he stopped at this car wash and got the amount of the car wash and paid and got his change. And he was walking out and he realized that the clerk had given him more change than he needed, that he should have gotten. What do? He turned around and went back to the clerk and handed her the money and said, "You gave me too much change." She said, "I know I did. I was at your church on Sunday. I wanted to know what kind of person you really are." You never know. We can give thanks for all the saints before us because now they don't burden us. They don't make our load heavier. Matthew described the Pharisees like this. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on the shoulders of others. But they themselves are unwilling to lift a finger to move them. Those are not the saints of our lives. Well, in closing, let me say that what I think is really important is how to keep balance in our lives in all this. Ultimately, it is our real spiritual friends who help us keep balance. Loving and caring people who will us good and not ill, and who hold us in their hearts of prayer, and who hold us accountable when we want to stand out, to climb up on that pedestal so that others will see our good works. We give thanks for the community of saints who love us and guide us and shape us and humble us into the servants of a loving God, and who tell us the truth in love about our lives. That's what Jesus did to the Pharisees and to the disciples. That's what Jesus does for us. And we need to be humble in these days and share the truth of love. George Antonakis, in a sermon called Portrait of a Wise Man, says this: what do you do when you are diametrically opposed to another person's viewpoint? If you live in a world of chaos and you want to live in a community gathered in the peace of God, how do you get from one place to the other? He says, submit yourself to God, adopt God's values as the wisdom of your life. I would offer, just like a common practice these days of washing our hands very often to ward off coronavirus or flu, then we get along with each other and we change our chaotic, arrogant lives to others, grounded in gentleness and peace and humility. So we wash the arrogance and the envy and the greed and selfishness off of our lives. And may that be so for you and for me this day.